So, welcome to eVision Live with Dr. Alexandra Kleeberg
and Dietrich Busaka. Welcome to your happy, healthy, fulfilled new year. Today we have a special guest,
Tom Wakechild. And Tom Wakechild, we welcome here in our fireside chat that we have today with you. And Tom has been a business consultant for many years, and he has been also working on the course on miracles. He had
written the Course of Miracles for Dummies.
Yes, I think this is
that
actually
would be me.
On me, because I think this would be good for us to understand, because anything what I understand, most other people can understand too. And this has been a bestseller, but it was not always that easy for you. And I think we're going to discuss this today, because the one topic which is really on your heart is the topic of fear, of ending fear. And if I got it right, you had a childhood which was not that easy, and was full of fear and guilt, and was not that easy for you.
So maybe you have a special incident that brought you to this topic.
Well, I think that in regards that I could relate to probably early childhood experiences. And in this case, I had a reoccurring nightmare that would happen. And what it was a situation where there was, I guess, I'll just say, it was basically a murder. I was witnessing a murder, and it was happening in my home. And I was sitting on the steps watching this, and I couldn't do anything to prevent the crime from happening. In this case, it was my twin sisters that were being murdered, and I couldn't do anything. I was basically frozen. And whenever the perpetrator saw that I was witnessing it, he basically, once he had finished killing my sisters, he turned towards me, and I was just frozen on the steps. I couldn't move. I was just in a state of terror. And whenever he finally, reached me, I would basically wake up in a sweat or whatever. And it was that fear, that paralyzation. And throughout my childhood, I was constantly in a state of fear. And it was this realization that just being judged, that you weren't being good enough. And being raised a Catholic, actually, the one thing that kept me going in regards to not committing suicide, which was, I was constantly suicidal back then, was this idea that I would just be exchanging a temporary fear, which for a permanent one, because with Catholics, if you kill yourself, you go to hell. So that was the thing that really was I want to say motivating factor, was this idea that fear could so paralyze you that you would be unable to protect yourself, your values, or others that were of consequence to you. And so that was basically the one thing that haunted me as a child.
So that was your thrive to get out of fear. That was your longing or your vision, or what was it?
Yes, if I would have been asleep at age 16 or 17, sound asleep, and you would have woke me up and would have said, "Tom, what is your purpose in life?" I would have just blurted out, "Not to have to come back here." That would have been my sole purpose. And eventually I realized that that purpose would be what would keep me here. Actually, what you resist persists. So that was it. So I always had this idea that this place, this earth, was not really my home and that I didn't want to be here. And so that was really where I was coming from, and that was my motivating factor in everything I did. So from one thing, you speak of childhood, whether or not it was traumatic or not, it was exactly what I needed for my ability to become who I am now. Everything that's provided for us are learning lessons, and what we have to do is be aware that we're here to be learners, not earners. And our society, our peers, our social structure, our parents, the institutions, all try to convert us from the natural learners that we come here born to be into earners, where we look and we think that our value, our worth comes from outside of ourselves. And so that really is critical. And this idea that our society, we've been indoctrinated into a fear-based thought system, is a basic problem that we need to address and become aware of.
Yes, and I think there is a lot of money made by fear. That's what I teach, that the pharmacies, a lot of the medical system, also a lot of the psychological system, the insurance system, the education system, they're all built on fear, right? That's how our society earns money and how it is structured and works. It's the zeitgeist,
Yes.
the collective unconscious and even the collective conscious mind is fear.
Yes, fear has been proven to be a very good motivating factor. And whether it's the church, society, the king, whoever it be, they realize that fear can be used to manipulate and control others. So
and to make them obedient.
In regards to ours, go ahead. You were,
go ahead. Okay.
Okay.
So how would you define fear?
Well, if you look at Webster's definition of fear, it says that it's a feeling associated that creates an anxiety a lot of times because of our inability to, know what's happening. But I would like to put out a different definition for fear. I think fear, we can call it an anxiety or a feeling, but it arises anytime you feel that you lack the creative ability to handle a given situation. Fear doesn't really have anything to do with reality. It has to do with your beliefs about reality and how you perceive things. So whenever we look at the idea of fear, we tend to associate it with a happening, when really we should be associating with something that's happening inside our mind. Mm-hmm. Fear arises, like I say, when you believe that you lack the creative ability to handle the situation. You note that whenever I use the term, this definition, I'm putting in creative ability, because we have within ourselves the ability to impact what I'm going to call the creation cycle. We have that ability internally, whether or not we act upon it or we realize the game rules and how those, how we have to use the rules that we've given, the universal laws, so that we can get the desired results is another matter. But we have to be aware that we have creative ability. For example, if something happened and I believed that I had the ability to handle a situation, I wouldn't move into fear. If by the same token, and I had a situation where I thought that, so it's our beliefs. It's always our beliefs as to whether or not we're going to move into fear. It's not the event itself. So that's the other thing. Also, I'd like to just say, we've been taught that fear keeps us safe. And when I give that definition of fear, I want to distinguish a little bit between the bodily reaction of the fight, flight, freeze type response that's in the body, that's hardwired, versus what is up here. Because if for my example, fear is really non-existent to me right now. But if I was walking down the street and some car came around and beeped its horn, I might still jump, because that's a fight, flight, physiological response that we've been hardwired to do, that alerts us, that brings us to the matter at hand where we can look at it and then deal with it. But that's not really fear. That's something that's a bodily response, and fear is a mental response.
Mm-hmm. I really like this definition that you say fear is when we don't have creative methods to deal with a situation. So fear is sort of like not only the opposite of love, but also the opposite of creativity.
Yes, whenever I deal with people, I've dealt with two groups generally that seek my assistance in trying to handle their problems or to live a more fulfilling, happier, richer peace, have inner peace in their life. The first group tends to be high achievers, actually. If they were looked at from the outside world, they'd say, boy, those people seem to have it all together. And in a lot of areas they do, but in certain areas they still suffer from some fears. Okay? Those people are highly responsible individuals. Okay, they would have a attitude that is of high consciousness, a responsibility consciousness. The second group that often seeks my help are people that wallow in victim consciousness. Those people, think that the world's out to get them, which is what I used to always think. As a matter of fact, I hated the world that hated me as a child, But we have this situation where the second group is in victim consciousness. They lack the ability to take responsibility to do anything. So in both those cases, the high achiever and the person in victim consciousness, I've discovered that in order to solve their problem or to get them to release their fears, they had to first uncover the source of their fears.
Yeah.
The source of their fears actually lied in their thought system. We've been ingrained into a fear-based thought system, and it's foolish to believe that we can ever escape fear within that thought system, because the thought system itself is designed to create, generate, perpetuate fear in the first place. So you can
how
never
do
escape
you do that?
fear.
Can you give us an example for that? That we have this fear-based thought system, which is supported from the society. So how do you teach people how to get rid of this?
Is this your 7R formula?
Well, there's, in my case, come up with a 7-step formula. It's called the 7 R's for Fearless Awakening. There's actually 7 steps, although you could group them into different areas. One thing, the first set has to do with realize and recognize. You have to realize who you are. We've been brought up to be taught that we're an earner, that our worth comes from outside of ourselves, that it's a question of what did I do and having to get a certain result to win someone's approval or love, which in this case would be conditional love, which wouldn't be love at all. It would really be just another form of fear, disguised form of fear. So the first thing that we have to do is to realize who we really are. Fear arises anytime we fail to get either of these two questions wrong. The first is, who am I?
Who am I? Okay.
The second is, what do I value and why? As long as, if we get either one of those two questions wrong, we're going to form the basis for a fear-based thought system. We've got to get those two right. This idea that I am the body and the body is me, science tells us that we're much more than the body. We've got some consciousness, and it's this other thing. Now, in the ancient days, and I say ancient, but actually we've had the axial model, which was this idea that we've got a body and there's some spirit, soul, or something beyond that. Consciousness is what they call or use the term today. Whenever we got into the age of reason or the Enlightenment, we moved away from that and we tried to believe that everything could be explained by physical laws. Science has been working, trying to discover the link between the physical, how the physical creates the idea of thought, consciousness. They've never been able to do it. And
so what's the next
book, we'll talk about. Okay, well, you've got to realize why you value things. Okay, so this is the second step, and you can see that these are interlinked, because once you define yourself differently, you get into a point where now you have to determine why you value something, what you value, and why it is. As long as you perceive yourself to be an earner instead of a learner, you will always be in fear. Because even when you earn the reward, because you think it's something outside of yourself, you always run the risk of having it taken away and losing. So you always will remain in fear. So we have to move from the idea.
Can you tell us about the other R's, maybe precisely, so our listeners get enthused to buy your book? It's about ending fear.
Okay. Well, you've got to recognize that the first two steps is trying to get you to what I would call from unconscious incompetence to the level of conscious competence. Conscious competence is when you realize you've got a problem, what the problem is, you correctly define it. Then we move into the next three steps, which are relationships, responsibility, and reinterpret. Okay. This all deals with the creation cycle. See, when we defined fear, we spoke specifically about our ability to handle situations. And we all have creative abilities within ourselves. So in these next three steps, we're dealing with how the creation cycle works, what are some universal laws, why the idea that the genie is universal, is out there to give me whatever I wish, doesn't really work in practicality, because we don't understand the laws of the universe. So we're trying in these steps to say what the laws of the universe are, how they work, and then to actually start claiming some responsibility. One of the problems with that first group that was responsibility consciousness, why they still lived in fear, is because they didn't understand what they were responsible for and what they weren't responsible for. A lot of times we've been bred and taught that we're responsible for making someone happy, okay? Yeah. We're responsible for solving other people's problems. That is a thing for disaster. That's going to doom you into a fear-based thought system, because you've got to realize that you can't necessarily make people happy. If you think you can, let me ask you this question. How do you solve someone's problem when their problem is that they don't want their problem solved? They don't want their problem solved by you. You just can't.
Yes,
And that's what we need to realize. These motivated people, these people that wanted to control their world, often felt that they had let other people down. And that was the source of their unhappiness. That was why they lost their inner peace. So we've got to realize that we're not the only kid in the sandbox. And whenever we talk about the creation cycle, there's a individual creation cycle, and there's a creation cycle that's occurring on a mass collective conscious basis. You've got to realize that this planet is basically a fear-based world, a fear-based planet, and it's a world of perception, not a world of reality. The third step in this creation cycle, or the fifth R, is reinterpretation, where we always have the ability to give empowering interpretation over the events and circumstances that happen. You know, Viktor Frankl indicated that and taught that we did not have the ability to control all our circumstances. The responsibility people think that they can. We can't always control all the circumstances, but we can always control how we choose to interpret those things.
So, Tom, if you lead your readers through these 7 steps, what is your big vision of a new world? Is it a world without fear, or what is it? What is your vision and your mission on this earth?
Well, in regards to that, I'm more focused on the individual. Now, there's a study in the book that talks about how the individual can have an impact on the mass collective consciousness. That actually 85,000 well-in-tuned people could actually flip the mass collective consciousness of 7.25 billion people. So it's a very small number.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in building a better me, building a better you, because that's your own world that you can control. You can't necessarily control what's happening across the world, but you can control your own private, individuated world of what I'm going to call provisional reality.
And what would be your answer if we say ending fear, starting what?
Well, the first thing that you have to do is to realize that fear is all pervasive. It's throughout our society, it's throughout our thought system, and we don't realize it. We've grown accustomed to living in fear and not even realizing that we're in fear. Okay, so go ahead.
When we end fear, what starts?
When you end fear, you become responsible for your own self-identity and your own private world of individuated perception. You will not necessarily end fear for other people. You may help them, but it's always an individual thing. When you end fear, you become able to respond appropriately. You're not locked into some past way of handling the problem. You become more decisive, but you also become flexible. You know where you need to go. You know that if something in the past is not working, you could take that, get feedback so that you could correct the action so that you could get different results. What we tend to be trapped in is this idea of beliefs and experiences, and whether you think beliefs or experiences come first, the reality is that we both had plenty of them. So we're already trapped in these creation cycles, and they're negative creation cycles. And in the 7R formula, we're going to show you how to break those negative creation cycles so that you can have new experiences. When you have new experiences, of course, that reinforces the new beliefs so that you become a deliberate creator of your world.
So it means ending fear, starting creativity, or ending fear, starting being yourself, or ending fear, starting love. What is the message? When you end fear, what happens within you?
Well, I'm going to say all of the above, but the first thing that you're going to really find is that you're going to be able to be more in the present. This idea of living in the past is going to be gone because now we're not going to be carrying our stories. You know, there in the book it talks about events versus experiences. Events are really what happened. Experiences are interpretation of what happened. And a lot of times it's not even what happened. You know, people, our story, people would wonder how we ever arrived at those stories. So from that standpoint, we're teaching responsibility consciousness. But ultimately, you also, if you're going to end fear, you've got to get the idea of a big picture. You're going to have a longer time horizon. You're going to realize that we all have all the time that we need to get it right. And everybody's on their own perfect path. And if we're all going to make it to San Francisco in the end, it doesn't really matter if somebody decides to take a side trip to see the Grand Canyon and another person decides to hop on a flight from Germany and go directly to San Francisco. In the end, we're all going to make it. So ending fear, really, in order to do this, you're going to start developing a new thought system, which is love-based, okay? It's going to process the idea of forgiveness. It's going to take into consideration acceptance. It's going to realize that everybody is on their own perfect path. This means that we're going to have allowance. And when you have allowance, you don't necessarily have to get results. Realize that you're a learner, not an earner, and your worth comes from how you define yourself as to who you are. And so you moved into that higher state.
So it's ending fear, start living, right? Start be alive in the here and now. Okay.
Yes. Also, let's see the other 2 hours which we still have. I love the sixth one, the revolt. It relates to my nature of being revoltive against a thing, or not against. Nowadays, I was against in the past. Nowadays, I was rebellious and revolting against in the past. Nowadays, I'm rebellious for something. I'm not anymore rebellious against something. I will always support something which is promoting, which is improving this world. So how do you teach that? What does it mean, this revolt? And then you talk the 7 steps as a restructure, where you're talking about forgiveness a lot, and the ending this the game of this blame of shame and guilt.
So now that we've moved through who we are, why we value, and realizing that this world is our play school, this world of perception for us to learn, we now move into the revolt, which is the overthrow of the fear-based thought system. So what we really have to do is we have to have a mental enema and remove the idea of our thought system that is based on fear. We have to move into a love-based thought system that's based on love, forgiveness, acceptance. Okay, so the revolt is really the decision to overthrow the thought system that you've been indoctrinated into. Because we think that we've chosen that thought system. That's not true. We were indoctrinated into it as early children, okay? And so now that we realize that, we need to overthrow it, because the problem, why those people, those responsible people and the irresponsible people, those two groups, couldn't solve their problem, is because they were trying to solve it within their own thought system, which was fear-based. So it was constantly generating new fear. It was, they were in the wrong field. We have to move the oil rig, so to speak, to a new field, drop it into a love-based thought system, which recognizes the truth of who and what we really are. And then we start realizing that why we value things is because of the learning lessons that they provide. Why we value things is because they give us experiences where we get to demonstrate our own truth, our own principles, and we can live authentically to those principles. You've got to realize that we're in a battle, and what we're revolting against is who is going to control our own self-identity. Are we going to let society, our peers, or are we going to take individual responsibility to say, this is my life, this is my, I've got the most skin in the game, and I'm going to take responsibility for how I choose to live. And I'm going to live authentically to those principles. Fear is directly associated with stress. Stress is any time we are not living our principles in alignment with our true beliefs, not our false beliefs that we've been indoctrinated into, but our true beliefs. And if we're not acting in alliance with those beliefs, we'll be in stress. If we're acting we're appropriately acting with those beliefs, but we don't really want to be. For example, like we're going to be studying for a test, and someone calls me up and says, let's go out and have a beer. I may decide to stay home and study for that test, but I'll really still want to have gone out for that beer. So I'll still be in a second form of stress. So we've got to realize that we're in control of our perception. And when you adopt a love-based thought system, one based on the truth of who you really are, also the idea of a bigger picture, that we are not just here to earn some living and die, that there's something beyond that,
so
then you can move out of fear.
Simple for our listeners is that first you have to get conscious of the fear system in our society, and that we are programmed like that, and then to get rid of that and to restructure new programs. And actually it's ending fear and starting love.
Love, yes, that's what you actually see, is a love-based thought system. What you're saying in your book.
So this book will be on Amazon.
The book is on Amazon. I think it's the ebook, right? Or it's also coming as a
paperback.
It's a printed version.
It'll be a paperback. It'll be a paperback and a ebook, also probably a hard copy too. Did want to say the 7th step, which is to restructure. See, it's one thing to know that you've got a problem. It's another thing to know where you need to be. The restructure, step 7, is going to give you the formula for the 12 pillars for correct perception, so that now you have something to base your new thought system on. It'll be a non-fear-based thought system. Yes, it'll be based on love, acceptance, big picture concepts of who you are, but that'll be provided in the 7th step. So we don't want to just end fear. We want to replace it with something that'll get us home.
Yes.
Which is the inner peace and happiness that we all seek and deserve.
So if people want to work with you, what can they do?
They can contact you via email, or they can check your new website.
Well, we put in the post with your website and your contact. So, and how can people work with you then?
Well, there's a few ways that they can do it. One is I would encourage them to go to the website. Website has a wealth of information. In this case, I really will have 3 websites. One is, of course, Americans for Dummies, which is more for people that are of the spiritual, or really it was designed for people that were studying the Course of Miracles. The other one is Wakechild.com, which is the website for Fearless Awakening, which is what this book is going to be. And then there's a third one that will be endingfear.org. And I would suggest perhaps the endingfear.org, because that will be talking about the steps of this formula in the book, how to get the book. If you actually wanted to do some individual mentoring, it would be Wakechild.com. But not only do I have a book, I also have some courses that are, especially the Uncovering Your Default Belief System, which is an online course, so that there are ways that without going the individual route, you can actually access these materials online. And Uncovering the Default Beliefs class, that'll be referenced in this book also, because one of the problems that we get into is we tend to deal with symptoms rather than with the cause of the problem. And example, there's we all have a lot of fears in our lives, and at least according to the surveys, the 3 top fears are fear of death, fear of snakes, and fear of public speaking.
So people who have these
those
fears,
are
they can just contact you and write you an email, check your programs, read your book. It will be on Amazon.
Yes, and on the website, endingfear.org.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we will post this so you can, our list at the end of this this video, so people can take note and know where to go to. In the meantime, I think our fire has gone down. So Tom, thank you so much, very much, for being with us here tonight. For you, it's not tonight, it's noon.
Very important to get rid of. It will delete all sorts of causes of disease, I think. So I think it's a very important book, Ending Fear, and I would add Starting Love.
Yes, Ending Fear and Starting Love. And we will have another eVision Live on fear, especially on fear, yes, where Alexandra will teaching your approaches to fear. It is really a cause for many, many, many diseases in this world. So Tom, it was great having you with us to fast tonight. For you, it's noon now, so I'm wishing you a good lunch.
And thank you so much. From the snow to the heat.
Yes. So thank you so much. And
open your heart and start.
Thank you for having me. Namaste.